자리로 다시 돌아와 주셔서 굉장히 감사드리고요. 뭐 좀 더 오시겠죠? Okay, so 이제 두 번째 그 세션의 연사분들을 소개해드리도록 하겠습니다. 첫 번째로는 이제 홍콩 M+의 실케 스미스크 Lead Curator of Moving Image이십니다. 네. 그리고 이지원 선생님 오셨는데 샤르자 미술재단의 그 Curatorial Department Manager이시고요. 지금 저희 같이 기획자로 이제 참여해주신 후올 알카시미 큐레이터를 대신해서 또 그 Curatorial Department를 대표해서 이렇게 나오셨고, 그리고 실제로 저희 프로젝트 굉장히 중요한 역할을 하셨기 때문에 네, 모셨고요. 그 다음에 멕시코 시티의 토노 페스티벌, 굉장히 성공적인 필름 앤 퍼포먼스 페스티벌을 런칭을 하시면서 저희 워치앤치 프로젝트랑 같이 협업을 했거든요. 그래서 저희 세만다 오저 큐레이터이자 토노 페스티벌 디렉터 모셨고요. 그 다음에 저희 트레버 스미스는 미국 매사추세츠의 세일럼이라는 도시에 있는 피바디 엑섹스 미술관의 Associate Director of Multisensory Experience, 그리고 Curator of Present Tense입니다. 굉장히 멋있는 타이틀이신데요. 그래서 트레버 스미스 큐레이터 모셨고요. 그래서 저희 첫 번째 세션하고 유사하게 시즌 1, 시즌 2, 그리고 시즌 3의 큐레이터 분들을 모셨어요. 그래서 저희가 이제 지난 3년간 이야기를 조금 더 다이나믹하게 할 수 있게 되기를 기대합니다. 그래서 첫 번째 세션과 동일하게 이제 각 연사분들께서 각자 미술관에서 어떻게 워치앤칠이 구현됐었는지 굉장히 짧게 한 3분 정도 안에 얘기를 하시고 우리가 대화를 시작하도록 하겠습니다. Alright, on to you. Is it okay?
So I just say a few words about, okay, so hi, I'm Silke, I'm from M+, and I had joined M+, just a few weeks before Jihoi reached out to our museum to suggest to become a partner of Watch and Chill, and I was very excited about this idea. I've been a moving image curator for a long time, and before becoming an institutional curator in M+, and before in Singapore, I have been running a film label for artist films in Paris for 15 years. So the idea of circulation, of moving images being shared, and to use really the digital as a multiple or reproducible format was something that was very familiar to me. But then you have to imagine I was just new in M+, and then the museum was about to open. So we opened in November 2021. So everyone was extremely busy setting up the opening shows, working with the collection. And then on top of that came Watch and Chill. So I think the institution was immediately very supportive of the idea and loved the idea, especially also because we didn't have a physical building yet that was open to host exhibitions. But I think what was challenging for me in this process was really to work with the collection registrars and the team that takes care of the collection, because the idea of putting a selection of video works from M+ on a streaming platform in Korea was something that terrified them. So it was a very interesting process that we worked through with the help of Jihoi. Also, having another institution having similar concerns was very helpful, and I think everybody loved the project in the end. And we could sadly never stage it in our physical building, so we opened in 21, and then we were supposed to show the works in 22, at the beginning of 22, but then Hong Kong went into a really terrible lockdown for 4 months, so we could never present the work as screenings or in our MediaTek as we had planned. But we still had the platform and some online talks, and that gave us still a good presence, I think, in this project.
Really wonderful M+ international program that all the collaborating museums, discussing about digital strategies during pandemic.
And hello, nice to meet you. I'm Jiwon. I'm here today to represent Sharjah Art Foundation, but actually I had a kind of a similar experience like Silke. So I actually joined the foundation earlier last year. And actually Watch and Chill was one of the first projects that was that I had to manage over. So it was kind of after being based in Seoul for 10 years and then moving to a totally different place. But then also starting that with this project was actually quite special because it kind of gave me a sense of continuation. And it was also about seeing all of the works by these Korean artists who I've experienced in a totally different context. Now I'm finding a way to introduce them into Sharjah, which was also, I felt like was a special opportunity. I think I don't know what plan is with Sam or Timothy for their presentation, but I think our presentation in Sharjah was probably one of the only kind of full-on exhibitions, I think, aside from MMCA. So we're seeing some pictures here, but aside from the online project, we also had a 3-month exhibition, which was consisted of like a very large cinematic kind of screening room, and also a portion where we were being more, not experimental, but more responsive about the individual video works that are not designed for cinematic screenings. So I think that was also one thing that we tried to do, is defining kind of ways to engage with the audience with video art, but also kind of embracing the different formats that these works are asking for. So yeah, and I think also one thing, I think it was also similar with M+. The works that we selected for the project was from our collection works. So I think that's also, we had different kind of approaches to that. Some were like from the community or engaging with your other projects that you're doing. But for us, it was also from a collection point of view, which I think was also one of the very interesting questions that Watch and Chill kind of raised, because it's also about how do we share the collection, and what does kind of media-based work provide us, what kind of opportunities are there. So I think that was kind of, yeah.
Fantastic.
Hello. Okay, perfect. I'm Sam, and I guess TONO, so I actually founded a festival called TONO, which its first edition was this past April, so just about a month ago. So I think probably the youngest partner that was part of Watch and Chill. So I actually have immense thanks and the trust that Jihoi and the MMCA team, the rest of the collaborators gave us in participating in this project. And I think in a way, TONO is interesting as well, because it did actually bring this idea of decentralized curating out even a bit further, because TONO is very rhizomatic. So it's a festival that focuses on time-based media specifically, so video art, experimental film, music, performance, dance, anything where the artist dictates the time. So our partners for this were 5 museums that are all, 4 of them are government national museums, and 1 of them is a trust, but is I guess is private, but the way it receives funding is still not, it's not like an incredibly well-funded museum by any means. And the 4 other venues were 2 cultural centers and then 2 music venues. So it was interesting for us, the way in which the projects developed. So when I received kind of the introduction from Jihoi through another curator in Mexico, we had already had a pretty much closed artist list, but we started talking about the theme of suspense. And in the end, 6 of the TONO artists really naturally were responding to the theme anyway. So we're like, perfect, let's integrate Watch and Chill into our existing program. And the way this played out was we had, those 6 artists had video installations, so more similar to the presentation here and what it sounds like happened in Sharjah of an installation-based project. And then we also had 3 evening screenings of the rest of the program. So it was a nice mix. So the installations took place across 2 institutions, one being more of a cultural center that became like the headquarters, and then one being a museum. And then the screenings were across another museum in a very traditional, like 160-person cinema space. And I think for us, which is interesting to think about, and maybe we'll talk more about as this conversation goes on, and I think came up earlier, is that I think aside from me and Silke, we're the only curators that focus specifically on moving image. We have a number of architecture curators, people that are curating foundations, general collections, but I think the 2 of us are the ones that focus on this type of media. So for me and for TONO, really thinking about what I thought was really powerful about Watch and Chill, and I was just participating now, so a very different moment in the pandemic. Pretty much, I think everywhere in the world was more or less open, maybe some restrictions, but there wasn't the same level of lockdown as the first season. And what that meant for us, as well as I was excited that in 2020, it meant that there's this amazing access to seeing video work online. But then I think a lot of institutions maybe didn't treat it with the most respect. And they were just like, oh, we can just do this thing online. We don't have to do the same in-person presentation. And then this is an amazing opportunity of, you have the hybridity of you have online, but you also have the respect of let's show it in gallery spaces. Let's think about the different ways of doing that. And sorry that I've gone over time a little bit.
No, but I think it's really, yeah, like the sort of TONO was presented in a way that it's all across Mexico City, right? So like different places and public venue and private venue and outside and inside. And so, yeah, it kind of really kind of extended that kind of rhizomatic network that we initiated. So, okay, up onto you, Trevor. I think there's an issue with the sound.
Hi, good morning, all. So I come from the Peabody Essex Museum, which is in effect the longest continuously operating museum in the United States. We're founded in 1799, and the museum is very much an institution whose collections are rooted in the interactions between cultures. So a project like this is very interesting to me, both as a way to kind of reflect in a kind of a contemporary way the needs and the creative potentials of, as you know, of collaboration, of conversations across cultures. The context for us, or that I started discussing with Jihoi, was a little like Sam, in that we had another project which is running through a good chunk of this year called After Hope. It's a large-scale group exhibition that has been curated by the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco. So we kind of started exploring some of the artists there. Jihoi presented a number of artists to me, and I also thought it was important to have Indigenous voice in the project, so we brought in Skawanati. And it was a very productive dialogue because, you know, for me, I'm very much a curator who tends to work with artists who are much more, let's say, kind of fixed in their relationship to media. So even when I'm working with video per se, you know, there's a lot of kind of engagement with the specific media, the specific site. It's a much more site-specific practice. So kind of working in this fluid context where a work might exist in many different kinds of screens and context was quite exciting.
Yay. Thank you, Trevor. So, 1 second. Yep. Let's go on to, right. So the presentation will just run on the background. So I think like from the opening question will be the same question as the first session. That it's precisely about the decentralized curatorial mode. So in the context of the previous conversation with the first session, how would you describe your curatorial engagement for Watch and Chill, and to what extent did you allow this process of losing control in the decentralizing curation to be fruitful or meaningful or not to your own institutional response to the project?
Yeah, so I've been in my own practice always very used to co-curating. It's something that I'm very interested in, and more collaborative approaches is something that yeah, I always thought is amazing because we can go far beyond what we can do as an individual. So that resonated really well with me. I also had the advantage of being very familiar with Joselina and Kittima's suggestions because I had lived in Southeast Asia for a long time. So I think the works coming from MMCA were the really new discoveries for me, which was yeah, super interesting. And I think I had also two co-curators, two younger colleagues, Catherine and Coel, and we just used this time also to watch things together because in institutions we have so little time, you know, to just focus on content because we're always busy with our admin work. So I think that was a very beautiful experience of just taking that time and watching things again and again and then finding resonances. And from M+, I think we probably had some of the oldest videos in the selection. So we, as you might know, we have a big, we received a big donation from Uli Six. So we have an amazing collection of Chinese contemporary art. And a lot of the videos in our collection are also from the SIG collection. And when joining M+, I felt that this collection was always treated as a complete Chinese collection. So I wanted to bring that into the picture of Watch and Chill. And it was interesting to look at, so many of these videos are from the 80s and 90s, you know, when China opened up and when artists could also travel and started developing new relationships with other countries and also the idea of home. And because that was our subject, you know, it was very interesting to bring these older works into the conversation, but also some of our star artists like Chao Fei with Haze and Fog, you know, like artists thinking about forms of alienation that resonated very strongly with what was going on during the pandemic.
So I think for us, for our session, it was with us and MMCA and ArcDes. And it was, I think there was a very interesting kind of collaboration because ArcDes and our collection works, there was also like miles of like differences in between the works that was pretty much evident. And that was, I think, like trying to deal with that was actually quite interesting for us, especially when it came to the space. But I mean, you mentioned about losing control, but honestly, sometimes I think as a curator, you're never really in control of anything. Because you rely on other staff, you rely on artists, especially, like, you can't like dictate the works. The works have their own world, and we basically try to communicate it, but you can never control it. And also, especially a group show, like they're all different beings coexisting in a space, then like the least the curator can do is actually control it. So it's about like just sometimes mediating or just connecting these very different things and just kind of embracing like the arbitrary like connections that just come up by that. And I think that was very interesting. So the works that came from the Sharjah Art Foundation, a lot of them not very old, but a majority of the works were actually from the mid to late 2000s. There were some from the late 2010s, but it was also following like the nature of how the collection was formed. We were trying to kind of gather more historical works from that time. And there were a lot of the works were very politically intense that were from that region, from East Asia, East Africa, West Asia, Middle East, or whatever you would like to call. And it was dealing with a lot of very politically intense things, but also like juxtaposing that with like ASMR videos, which was really like that kind of like at that tension, that contrast, and also like the idea of the sub-themes, how far can like these actually go when you try to think about them as concepts. So I think that was kind of like, so when we actually did the exhibition, made the Sharjah version of the exhibition, we had a very small ASMR lounge in a corner. We had like a sofa and anything, so when you go there, you actually enter into a different kind of a mode. But I think also one thing I wanted to mention is that when we were, even though like we're saying like decentralizing curating or about like losing control, but also when we were curating for our own versions and our own venues, we actually had we could be very free on making like those curatorial decisions. So I think that was also the part of the generosity of the project. Like you collaborate in certain ways, but also you get to be your own project in another aspect, which I thought was like a nice kind of combination to work with.
I think, I could be wrong in this, but I think TONO was the first confirmed collaborator for season 3, maybe? Like the first confirmed collaborator.
Yeah.
So I feel like from the beginning we were, because I remember early like Zoom meetings we're having, which also like to speak of time difference and like thinking about different ideas of things, like I was in Mexico, you're in Korea, it was always this like whatever 13-hour difference, a very difference of perspectives of things. But it was great because you sent this amazing initial prompt, and then we had a lot of conversations about, based on conversations happening in Mexico, what do I think maybe makes sense? And then we had a really nice kind of reworking the final text that came out together. And then as other partners came in, I think their suggestions were made. But what was also nice was some synergies. So like you originally shared me like a very, simple curatorial strategies of like Google, Excel spreadsheets and whatever else. But 2 of the artists on it that you had wanted to work with, like Cecile B. Evans, was someone that I had curated in a program a year before, so wasn't going to be part of TONO, but someone that was like very much like in our network. And Jacoby Satterwhite, who I was already in conversations with for TONO. So I was like, this is perfect. Like, let's just confirm him, and then he can be kind of like our first TONO watch and chill artist. And then I think, yeah, it presented, there was a lot of kind of like organic ways in which the artists for TONO, some of them in very obvious ways deal with suspense in their work, others in more subtle. But I think, yeah, also by like the nature of the medium, we're able to be more flexible and include some people who, like, for example, Gurush Melkoinian, who actually, I think this was the premiere of the work. And he's an artist that I'm dear friends with, and I knew he was doing this project. And I remember messaging him being like, can you finish this by this date, you think, because this would be an amazing place to have it first shown. Oh my God, what else was I going to say? There's something else I was going to mention that I can't remember. It will come back, but yeah, basically this is so frustrating now. It's there somewhere. But yeah, no, I think the selections and being able to kind of be fluid with it, and we were speaking for so many months before we kind of got to the place was nice to.
Literally, it was like different case for the 3rd season, that like the first prompt, like the curatorial structure was drastically changed over time. And so there's only one category that that are kind of had exactly the same title as is now. And then all 4 other categories were changed. But the concept, it was kind of similar, but then how we call it, how do we use specific terminology was discussed in depth, and we changed it along the way. So yeah. Trevor, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I think if Sam was the first curator involved, I was probably the last, and in fact, Cecil B. Evans became part of the PEM group of artist selections. So it was really great to be able to kind of riff on sort of enter a conversation in which a riff was already taking place. As a fully institutionalized curator, if you will, museums so often have issues around control, even when they're working with solo projects, like the artist is an object of inquiry. Whereas from the beginning, my approach has always been to treat the artist, and in this case, my fellow curators, as kinds of partners in a collaboration and a conversation. So in that sense, my practice and my approach to this is quite aligned with what Silke described at the start of this selection, because the great advantage of working this way is that you get to see your institution, you get to see your context through new eyes. You know, you're living and working within a framework, and to have the blessing of other perspectives is a very powerful thing.
I remembered what it was going to be, which is maybe not even necessarily that interesting, but just like curating also sometimes comes down to like logistics. So in the selection, like TONO had 32 artists. Some of them were just performances, so would not have been possible for this at all. But there was 11 video installations, and there's 2 other artists that for sure would have been amazing in this program, and they're people whose works I was so honored to show, but my relationship with those artists was through their galleries, and the galleries were incredibly helpful and were amazing. But we're talking about one specific artist who is incredibly well known internationally, has a few major blue chip galleries, and the process for getting anything approved is like 6 people need to do it. So I was like, the ability to work flexibly with multiple other partners in different formats that might change is just, it's not fair to my other institutional partners because they might have an issue later down the road. I think, yeah, Watch and Chill opened first here, but TONO opened a week later, so we were working in the same frame. But if I'm thinking entirely a year later, what might happen at NGV with an artist who needs a lot of approvals is tricky. So I think for us, it was thinking about artists that I personally, as a curator, have relationships with. A number of them I've worked with before. They're artists that I have on WhatsApp, so I can text them at a working hour, but be like, hey, what do you think of this thing? Are you okay with this idea, a screening versus this? And they're people that are really flexible to work with, which I think was important to have.
Yeah, like this project was not possible if we didn't have WhatsApp.
No, definitely not.
WhatsApp, Instagram, and Google Google Drive. Yeah, I mean, we are kind of working in that mode of, yeah, like whoever who is willing to be as flexible as the project proposed to be. And I want to talk about like this mode of collaboration a bit more. Like, so frankly speaking, I feel like the mode of working together or democratic decision making was not necessarily glorified within us. You know, like for conceptually, like, you know, when it comes to like debatable issues, a lot of times it was like one-to-one solution most of the times, and resolving it between smaller group first, and then sharing it with a larger group after finding an answer. So in a way, like there's a kind of institutional context that certain issues has to be dealt in a subtle manner, and there's also kind of diplomatic like representation of institutions. So there is like different modes of practices that has to be played. So gradually, I think we began learning to deploy this Watch and Chill collaboration as a useful toolkit in addressing the most conceptual, most concurrent issues in the art practice today. So yeah, I mean, I think as we talk about like challenges and kind of trying to overcome the debatable issues, like maybe we can share a little bit of like some episodes in our failed attempts or solutions that we found. Maybe like Silke, you can talk about like the political issues that we had came across.
Yeah, maybe I start quickly with the institutional internal issues. So as I said earlier, the working with the registrars and, you know, the people taking care of the collection was super challenging. So what we decided in the end is to ask for exhibition copies directly from the artists. So that's how we managed this problem. And I think most of them were very open. The logistics were also quite chaotic, you know, because many of them are based in China. They don't use WhatsApp or Google. So we had to rely on, and they don't speak English. So I had to rely on other colleagues, you know, negotiating that with them. But it's true, the political context was quite difficult in Hong Kong in recent years, as you might know. So with this new national security law, artists, because we had a lot of political works as well that we had pre-selected, were quite concerned to put a film on a platform where anyone can watch it and also therefore identify the people who participated in this protest, or, you know, things that were all of a sudden not acceptable anymore. Because we're in an interesting situation in Hong Kong, so every online film or content does not need to go through the film censorship board, only when we show it physically. But obviously, you know, people pay attention to what M+ is showing. And so that we were in this yeah, all of a sudden new situation. So there were some artists who we took out from the online program, but we had programmed them for the physical presentation, which then sadly didn't happen. But so just, yeah, I think this awareness of the need to provide a proper framework, you know, and to be there and to also protect the artists and the people featured in the films was something that we were very aware of. And we were also, yeah, glad that you know, always was, because I think, you know, we can speak about the democratic side of things, and you summarized it very well, but I think always having you as a partner to also be very frank about certain decisions that we needed to make without wanting to censor or to, but really this idea of protecting works in the digital space, I think was an important element.
Also because we're getting trust from the artists as well, where we have to be as like transparent as possible with like what is going to be to the artist side as well. And I also kind of think it was important for the artists to feel that they feel safe, you know, in showing us and giving us the content.
And I think that was also what we really appreciated from the artists, I think. Because also as artists, it may not be the most safest, it may not be the safest decision to release your work online and also be shown in other venues in a format where we're not actually sure, where everybody gets their own choice. But I mean, fortunately, the artists that were from SAF's collection, they were very open to the idea. But there was one incident. I won't call it a challenge because ultimately it actually really helped us to understand this project and take it a bit further. But one artist did decline the invitation because he mentioned that his work is actually not something that can be transferred online. It has to be shown in a specific way. It has to exist in a space in a certain way for it to be actually itself. And I think we have been talking about like the malleability of like digital-based works, but also sometimes I feel like there's also like an extreme stubbornness in like moving image works that you require like a certain technology. We were talking about like 60mm films. Things can be transferred or exist online, but also they have a different life where they have to be, where they prefer to be in like a certain size, certain light. And that was actually, that response from that artist really also made us go through that and push that approach a bit further for our exhibition version. So we ended up not including that work in the online platform, but it was still included in our physical exhibition. So it was this work that used like a transparent kind of screen, and the light was kind of spilling all across the space. And to put that work there and also show the works that sometimes some works cope better in different platforms. Some works actually work great on mobile phones, but also in the space. And having this specific work, which is a bit more stubborn in that way, was also like, I think was a really nice spectrum of how actually artists are dealing with these kind of new media and how sometimes they prefer not to. And that also actually brings into question what museums actually do when we're showing these works in a physical space. Like, what are we offering? And for sure, museums are social spaces. It's like the gathering, the actual encounters with people, strangers in front of the same work is an invaluable part. But also it is about giving like almost like an object-like presence to things that you believe that can be just on a screen. So I think that artist response really helped us to really develop this project. And yeah, it was a challenge at first, but
Totally agree. Like, I mean, as we discussed with Joselina earlier, like all those like challenges and stubbornness, like we took it with respect, and because, you know, it's not just like one way or the other. There's no right answer to like present what's the best way, and I think there's, you know, like intentions in certain way, and then if there's an artist's intention to present in a certain way, and that is the most kind of valid form of presentation. So yeah, we've really kind of, I think we pushed in the same manner.
Yeah, I mean, points that you're bringing up are, I know for me, because I mostly work with artists who are making video work, like there are artists who make net art and work that's meant to be viewed online, and there's artists that make video that are fine to show it online, but there's a lot of artists that did not make their video to be seen on phone, even if it's an amazing way for it to be digested. And there's some that I think in this process were open to it and they love, like Luis Roque is a great example. Like he, amazing Brazilian artist, his works kind of tend to be shorter, and he's talked about the relationship to the length of music videos. And he was really open for his work being online also because he did a screen series with the New Museum. So a number of his works are actually online on their website and have now been for like 2 years. So he's pretty open, whereas we had Girish, the other artist I mentioned earlier, the video that's being shown here is on a festival circuit. So he was like, I wouldn't be eligible for some of these potential opportunities if the whole work was made available online, so we have a trailer. So I think what was nice is the flexibility of what our institutional partners, and Jihoi is, I guess, the leader of this, were open to within that. But also, as you're bringing up, like the respect of like, yeah, like let's give video artists, like they should, like it's amazing they have, it's Gallery 5. Like Gallery 5 is no longer just a smaller gallery. It's an amazingly massive show with beautiful projectors and beautiful sound, and artists have ample space. And there's, I know 2 of artists that are really specific about their installation requirements in terms of just like scale of the screen. And those were completely matched and it looks amazing. So I think of like museums continually, increasingly also like respecting moving image as a medium that like deserves galleries the size of painting galleries is something that's really important. But then thinking about, okay, well, what does this medium offer that a sculpture or a painting doesn't? It can be shown digitally and it can be transferred digitally. So like thinking about which artists are open to different ways of working within the same project is what's super special about, I think, what Watch and Chill started to propose.
Yeah. Trevor, do you want to add something?
Yeah, one of the things that I really love about this collaboration is that, you know, the partners are all very, very different kinds of institutions. And institutions end up kind of creating contexts around themselves over time, giving a kind of a context for the reception of the works. And so, you know, certain kinds of works that might present challenge for the Peabody Essex Museum. So for instance, like we have no history of or engaging with, say, sexually explicit work, perhaps are less of an issue in a context like TONO, for example. His historical museum offers a different kind of context than something like M Plus or your museum, Jihoi. And I think that's fantastic. I think that that's one of the really signal shifts in the last generation, is that contemporary artists are working and are able to present their work in so many different contexts, and that actually allows them to have different kinds of lives in different institutions, in different communities, and different conversation. And I think that that's something that this curatorial format that you devised here is in fact a very powerful engine for that. Yeah,
I totally agree in a sense that like, because it's different culture that are at play in the same kind of, in the one exhibition setting. So there's like synergy, but also like there's different standard to imagine what would be the kind of the general opinion of the general public, and you constantly test this with like a new project. Whenever you do a new project, there's always this like little challenges that would this be acceptable to the general public? Like what if, yeah, like it was challenged, and to which extent like certain community would be offended or whatnot. And so I think like having this different sets of standards at play was also an interesting way, yeah, to put it together and to have synergetic element. Yeah, I want to talk about maybe going back to the moving image, because like, we have two curators who specialize in moving image. Yeah, like the fluidity of moving image and how, yeah, the malleability, and that we talked about it for some times now, that this collaboration would have not been possible if it was a sculpture work, for instance. But I think more important factor here is that apart from the fact that all works have been actually transferable digital files, Watch and Chill was trying to find its own way of operating this fluid media by running a streaming platform as a critique, but also learning from the existing OTT models to find its own niche in a certain extent. So especially in the third chapter, and our colleague so rightfully asked questions about that kind of provocation, that we talk about suspense in the third chapter as a way of immersion, while we take storytelling and moving image and image making as a strategy for a particular immersion to occur. I feel like this attention is in fact the individual's time, and how the time flow is different per person and per circumstances. Whether or not you are in an exhibition watching a film, or at home or in transit, can you pause? On which screen do you watch it? And so on. So yeah, maybe could you talk a little bit about like that aspects of how, yeah, like the malleability a little further as a moving image curator?
No, I mean, I think like from a distribution and circulation perspective, I mean, for me, it's just about like respect of like prioritizing moving image in the same, from an institutional museum context, prioritizing moving image in the same way that other mediums, I think historically, by other mediums, I mean, it's always going to be painting and sculpture, at least are kind of king in a certain sense. There's a lot of reasons for that, and I don't think this conversation needs to go into them, but making sure that like moving image and also like performance, which like usually when budgets tend to be cut, these are the spaces. Also design sometimes gets stuck in this as well, where it's either the budget's cut first or it's an afterthought, or it becomes like a public program. So it's like, oh, we just did this amazing maybe group exhibition and there's some kind of new media work, like, oh, let's just like add a performance later and here's a couple $100 to like whatever artist to do a thing. And it's like, okay, well, that person needed to conceptualize an idea and have rehearsals. And if it's a film, they actually need to be able to like pay for maybe a cinematographer, like the set designer, the editing or whatever else is coming into it. So just having the equal level of respect when approaching the work. But then in terms of circulation, I mean, if an artist is open to it, and there's definitely some from the TONO network, and I know the wider Watch and Chill, that it was an amazing opportunity for their work to be seen by thousands of people around the world, which wouldn't have had the opportunity or even maybe the knowledge of what they're doing. So I think from that perspective, as long as it's done with respect and consideration for like what is the mode in which this work is being shared, I think it's an amazing opportunity and something that's so special about the medium. And then also from like I mean, not that like video art is inherently like the most environmentally friendly, but it is great that like there's obviously a lot of energy being used, but like let's assume, I mean, TONO had to rent a lot of equipment, but let's say most of the institutions had their own equipment. The cost in terms of like other build out and labor could potentially be a lot lower than, let's say, another type of medium show, which means it's more flexible for the institution, but also lesser of a carbon footprint.
Yeah, I kind of regretted at a certain point because everybody started to travel, but then I set up this project to be like international collaboration without a single flight. So that was kind of the motto. And so, yeah, it was kind of, yeah, like kind of response to it. But then we all gathered together today. All right.
I think it's also good to look back a bit at the history of the media art pioneers, you know, because I think they always had this interest in circulation and simultaneous presentations or the satellite transmissions with Pike, or like, so you're building also on something that has a history. But what I always thought was quite sad is, especially in the last 20 years, you know, with the extreme development of the art market and the art market becoming capitalist empires, that has affected institutions a lot, you know, because we are also partners of this system, you know, and we also rely on it. And I think especially for video art, that has really stopped the circulation and the natural, reproducibility, you know, that has always characterized this medium. And so I feel re-injecting that kind of energy through a project like Watch and Chill was extremely valuable, and I hope we can continue to build on that and to be less territorial. And that's really the strength of the medium, you know, that you can show the same, we could technically all show exactly the same show at the same time, you know, and these kind of experiments have not happened so much in recent years. But also, I think what was really good for the platform is how you orchestrated the content. We spoke about this before, you know, that not everything was available at all times, and there was a kind of suspense, and you had to wait, and then it was available, and you saw more and more of the exhibition unfolding over time, which I thought was a very interesting principle on top of the physical show where you can see everything at once.
I mean, I secretly was kind of like having this fantasy about like, you know, like addressing and sending love letters to our subscribers. And in a way that like, I can directly communicate with my audience, and you know, like you can put like little notes, and that's why in the third chapter, I mean, a lot of people felt like really annoyed that there is this character who's like keep talking to you, but that was kind of the idea, like a little bit of like critique to the existing model of OTT, that like you just like submerge into this like streaming content, like we're not, that they sometimes ask you, are you still there? But then like, yeah, like this digital media is kind of like personified. And Orchard Chill then now have its own personality and its own character in response to all the AI kind of speaking to you all the time. So it's kind of like this eerie sensations that, is it human? Is it like a machine? It's like, it's a set of questions within the scenario. So that is another kind of, like the way that was important in that relationship you built up with the audience and the running of a streaming platform. So I think like now we have like 5 minutes more to the conversation. I guess my last question is kind of going back to the first question that we received from the floor, that MMCA, as I said before, promised Watch and Chill as a 3-year project, as a test run. From the museum's perspective, it was a great lesson learned to overcome challenges and turn them into opportunities. As a matter of fact, we're trying to find ways to continue what we have accomplished through at Watch and Chill, but we don't know what format would that be, and it may not be the same format. For instance, we have amazing film programs at MMCA Film and Video, and many more international collaborative projects in an exhibition format. So from one way or the other, I hope this mode of decentralized curation doesn't die out, like this less territorial kind of way of engaging and trust building would last for some format or the other and continue to have space in the museum space and programs. So this is an open question to all of you, to you guys in the stage and also on the floor. What should we do next? Like what form can this decentralized curation practice can take shape in a museum setting and beyond? Like not specifically MMCA, but also, like let's brainstorm.
I think, I mean, Silke kind of mentioned this while she was answering for another question, but I think one of the things that this Watch and Chill actually enabled, for instance, our foundation to actually explore more is about how are we going to actually share a public collection with more people, because like I think like most of the institutions that are participating here who have collections, it's a public collection. It's supposed to be accessible. It's supposed to be shared, but also it is systematically very, very hidden and very inaccessible. And I think especially when we come to like this video art, moving image or digital based kind of works, the conundrum is like really, really real. Some of the works actually inherently they want to not be an object, they want to be reproduced, they want to be shown in multiple places as an object, but also as a collection, sometimes we have to move away from those ideas. But I think Watch and Chill was a good opportunity for us to really question how are we going to kind of manage and share these kind of collection works that can be actually shared in its own format. I think that was one thing. I think as institutions one of the things that we can take away from this. And I think another important part of Watch and Chill is really like, as it was mentioned from the floor, it's alliance, right? And it is, for sure, it is based on trust, and it builds trust in different institutions. And I think that's also like a great resource that we're actually creating through this, because now we actually are forming relationships with other institutions, trust that can actually lead to other stuff. And I feel like that's also like an afterlife of Watch and Chill, even if it has a different title.
I was gonna say, building on what you're saying about how do you share the collections of public institutions more widely, because also the real estate in museums, like there's a lot of curators trying to curate a lot of shows and things that major institutions are booked out years in advance, and how do you share all of the collection works that there are? And I think ways that I've been thinking about of like alliance building, but some things that were brought up of like questions of funding, and then also it was really interesting to hear about what you're doing in Thailand with like equipment and like loaning out things to whether it's artists or it seems like maybe smaller institutions as well in the region. And I mean, I'm just thinking about TONO, which obviously is a baby of a project, and we are working with amazing museum partners. I mean, like the Museum of Modern Art Mexico, so it's not small partners by any means. It's kind of the MMCA equivalents in Mexico, but questions of funding are definitely a major issue in Mexico and specifically kind of throughout the region, and also access to equipment. So I could imagine like thinking about alliances that could be regional and international. So like, let's say a future, I mean, this is like really just a spitballing type of idea, but like working with larger partners. So let's like say the MMCA was able to loan out their equipment or have like an equipment buying fund, and then equipment is loaned out to different smaller regions throughout South Korea, not necessarily sending equipment to Mexico, but then loaning out their collection work. So like videos can be shown in different smaller regional spaces. Or it could be the instance of like doing collaborative strategic fundraising in different regions. So let's say we work with foundations, like Hans Nefkens was brought up by someone you were talking about. And I know some of the team there, and we've never collaborated before, but what if it's like we produce a work in Latin America with an artist that's kind of their network, and it means that they then buy the equipment that the institutions in Mexico do not own. Maybe they even get to keep it, and then it's something that can travel around other cities in Mexico. Like, just how do you strategize from thinking about what institutions have more money, and also especially with equipment, with video tends to be, I mean, that's the one thing. So it's like, if your institution has the equipment, it's not necessarily that expensive or carbon intensive to put a show on. But if you don't have equipment that artists that have shown internationally are expecting to use, it's potentially prohibitive. I mean, there was one artist for TONO that we had to change what work we were going to show because the projector required would have been $80,000 US to rent, which is that's the cost of a house. Like we're not doing that. Like, so thinking about, I don't know, strategies of equipment, and then also fundraising, I think was a really great point that you brought up earlier. And then that could look like, oh, maybe collections in museums in Asia can be shown in Latin America and vice versa that are otherwise just in storage.
And I think like one of the, like this is kind of unexpected learning, that another aspect that, you know, that Sam brought up is related to is the idea of like, you know, like culture versus like capitalism, in a way that like, you know, because you're looking at the world through the gaze of a culture, that like if there's any interesting aspects that what you want to kind of, to develop, and that cannot be done in certain extent because of the like inequity of the financial resources. And so unexpectedly, like this played out a certain significant element in certain part of the collaborators. And I think like, yeah, I think it's an interesting way to kind of imagine that like through culture, this is a bit maybe too naive, but but maybe there is a way that we can actually overcome that kind of inequity, like in the productions of art making. Maybe, I mean, for very specific curatorial intention, I would say. But yeah. Do you want to add something, and then we can actually open it up to the floor?
I have more question that I want to ask us, you know, it's like how we can make something like Watch and Chill sustainable beyond MMCA and beyond your commitment to this project, you know, because while we have a wonderful network and being now together is amazing, but what happens tomorrow, you know, and how, because if I just look back at my more independent experience, I built an amazing network because we all had a sort of philosophy we stick towards, you know, like being the non-mainstream, proposing alternative ways of looking at moving image through DVDs or things that were up to date. So now, you know, what is the thing that holds us together beyond the friendship that we maybe developed as very privileged people who were invited to be part of it? So I think that's, I mean, I have no answer to this, but I think that will be a key question. What are some measures that we could take to let it grow and to invite more people in, but also to sustain it in a regular, on a more solid basis?
Also, like, I mean, like personally, it was really intense experience of like, you're not only speaking to your own administrative team, but yeah, like literally speaking to 4 different administrative teams to like get up to the ladder to get permission and things like that. So like it was really intensive 3 years, to be honest. And like I think I gave up a little of my health. But I think it was worthwhile in a way that like I think we discovered a lot of kind of different aspects of exhibition making that we didn't really imagine before. But yeah, like I mean, I'm not to say that I want to continue the 4th season immediately, but I think there are certain elements that could take shape. I don't know what it is, but yeah, I want to hear more from you. Trevor, do you want to add something?
Well, I think you've all raised a lot of really important ideas, and I really like the way that you're thinking, Sam, around like let's figure out how to build systems that enable the kind of equipment and materials and resources to travel, to share, to whatever, you know, we already have. I mean, certainly video has been a medium that institutions, ourselves included, have been involved in co-productions, you know, to address this issue of raising the resources to produce a work at a level that it needs to be produced at. But I also think that, you know, there's we have these physical institutions that are dotted around the world, and really what's brought us together is this digital network. Now, most institutions really struggle to resource their digital selves, you know. They're at various stages of building out their digital spine, let's say, and then if, say, we all build out our digital selves, who are we talking to? I mean, we're talking to our same people. And what I think was really nice here is that idea of not only combining ideas, intelligences, sharing ideas, but of sharing audiences. And through sharing audiences, the message gets out to more people and it cross-pollinates in new ways. So I'm kind of becoming, from being a curator who is deeply invested in that kind of idea of, you know, the multi-sensory experience that you have in a kind of a specific space, in a specific gallery or context, to thinking that we have to spend a lot more time thinking through and collaborating on what kind of digital infrastructure we might want to build out in order to share stories that get to more audiences and more people who share values and ideas across countries and across cultures.
Yeah, I think it's a really nice response to Sam's proposal. I'd like to, it's time for the questions from the audience. Yeah, do you have any suggestions? You can just ask questions to the specific curator if you want to ask. Oh, yeah.
다음 시즌으로 만약에 생각을 한다고 했을 때 그런 생각이 문득 들었어요. 그러니까 각 미술관 그리고 각 기관이 갖고 있는 컬렉션에서 이제 비디오 작업들, 무빙 이미지 베이스의 그런 것들을 이제 이번 첫 번째 시즌을 통해서 진행을 했다면 이제 그 다음에 혹시라도 그런 왜 저희가 소위 얘기하는 그런 intangible art라고 하는 퍼포머티브한 그런 요소들도 갖고 있는 결국은 대부분의 미술관들이 그런 퍼포먼스나 이런 이제 무형의 것들은 아직은 컬렉션에 넣는 부분들이 힘들잖아요. 근데 결국 그런 식으로 더 확장할 수 있다면 그런 퍼포먼스 혹은 뭐 이제 그런 사운드 베이스의 어떤 작업들이나 이런 것들을 이제 보여줄 수 있는 또 다른 서스펜스의 도시랄까? 이런 부분들도 좀 해볼 수 있으면 참 좋을 것 같아요. 왜냐면 코비드 기간 동안에 이제 watchandchill도 너무 좋았지만 또 다른 많은 분야에서도 한 게 그런 뭐 전통 문화가 됐든 이런 다른 다양한 이제 영역에서도 그 스트리밍을 했잖아요. 그래서 미처 볼 수 없었던 것들을 정말 많이 볼 수가 있어서 좋았거든요. 그래서 이제 미술관의 기능이랄까 이런 또 많은 이제 영역들에서도 그런 퍼포먼스나 이런 것들도 한번 같이 해줄 수 있으면 참 좋을 것 같다는 생각이 들었는데 그런 부분에 대해 어떻게 생각하시는지?
Like, 되게 재미있는 제안이신 것 같아요. 사실 어제 저기 뒤에 정재근 작가님 계신데 그 어느 장면이라는 저희 이제 플랫폼에는 영상으로 나오고 있는 원래는 신촌극장이라는 굉장히 작은 관객이 한 5명에서 6명 정도로 제한되어 있는 굉장히 인티메트한 극장에서 보여줬던 연극을 저희 이제 컨텐츠로 가지고 왔거든요. 근데 이제 그게 비디오로 보여줄 수 있는 거에 한계가 있다 보니까 이제 라이브 퍼포먼스를 통해서 뭔가 관객들하고 직접 호흡하면서 좀 할 수 있는 걸 한번 이제 시도를 해봤는데 되게 의미가 깊었었던 것 같아요. 그리고 이제 퍼포먼스 콜렉션 얘기를 하셨는데 그게 지금 뭐 우리 미술관뿐만 아니라 이제 다양한 미술관의 좀 컨설인 것 같고 또 지금 MMCA에서 실험 미술을 하고 있기도 한데 이제 이런 것들이 점차 약간 미술사에서도 굉장히 중요한 위치로 이제 등극을 하고 있는데 이런 것들이 어떻게 뭐 유지 보수 및 가치를 인정받을 것인가? 그러니까 콜렉션으로서 그런 것을 생각을 했을 때 이게 하나의 좀 테스팅 그라운드가 될 수 있지 않을까 이런 생각을 해보기도 합니다. Like, do you want to add something about like performance art?
한국말로 돼요. 네, 한국말로 사실 좀 되게 말씀하셨을 때 되게 재밌다고 생각했던 게 사실은 퍼포먼스가 그러니까 인텐지블 하다는 데서는 약간 이런 비디오 아트랑 비슷한 점이 있기도 하지만 또한 사실은 실제로 실행할 때는 완전히 정반대의 어떤 성격이 좀 있잖아요. 그러니까 사실은 watchandchill이라는 게 기본적으로는 팬데믹과 함께 어떤 사실은 물건과 사람을 움직이지 않고 이거를 할 수 있는 어떻게 보면은 용이한 방법이었다는 것도 되게 중요한 이 프로젝트의 성격인데 퍼포먼스라는 건 진짜로 사람이 움직이지 않으면은 발생하지 않는 또 그런 일들 중 하나, 그런 작업 중 하나잖아요. 그래서 그러니까 거의 약간 제안하셨다는 게 되게 약간 재밌고 실제로 그게 어떻게 가능할까 말하자면 어떤 투어링 페스티벌이 아니라 실제로 이런 어떤 watchandchill의 기조를 유지를 하면서 이게 하지만 이거를 퍼포먼스라는 형식으로 해보면 어떨까 하는 그런 생각을 좀 하게 되네요, 약간. But maybe this is like Sam, you have some.
Yeah, oh God. The most, well, thank you for the question. And I think, yeah, things, well, I'll say what I'm gonna say so I don't forget it because I have the worst short-term memory. The most immediate thing I could think of for like how to involve performance in this that follows the watch and chill ethos of like multi-venue but traveling component would be, but like avoiding just basically like a troupe of, let's say it's like a dance related performance. So we're like framing it in a concept of something. So let's say it's a choreographer and 4 dancers is what it is. And it's like 40 minutes. What would traditionally happen, well, not always, but let's say generally the choreographer would have the dancers and they would travel around to different institutions. If it were to follow more of a watch and chill format, maybe just the choreographer travels. So let's say if we did it, let's just follow the season that's happening right now. Let's say there's a, I don't know, Mexican choreographer. They could be from anywhere. They do the project in TONO, 2 weeks of rehearsals. Realistically, they need a month. It's a 40-minute piece. Working with dancers locally in Mexico City, and then the choreographer is the only one to fly. And let's say they fly to Seoul, and then they work with Korean performers here. I could actually see that working out really well and being very interesting. But that needs to account also then for like, how is that being financed? And obviously if the choreographer is fine with that, and what's the time frame of it? But that type of format I think could be incredibly interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I also think like bringing other mediums into the picture, you know, going more interdisciplinary around maybe some topics could be interesting. Photography would be wonderful, or even archives. You know, we mentioned Jiwon Sino's beautiful work in the first season on a photography archive. I mean, these kind of research-driven artworks could be great. But also one thing that we discussed in the very early days was sort of instructions. Remember, we were thinking in the beginning of giving audiences instructions of how to best watch the video or just to activate their body. I feel in the pandemic, you know, the dance scene has developed amazing like master classes and things where you were very engaged also in front of your computer. So I think, yeah, something that could be executed then on site in different institutions would be.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, it's really nice that you brought it up. Like, so for the first season, we thought that it was important that like audience has to have a mission to watch it. So like the set of questions that I took as an example was that you have to always have to have your blanket over to watch like a specific artwork, or you have to have a glass of wine next to it or something like that. And we actually asked each artist like what they want to suggest, but like we didn't really get much response. So it was like a failed attempt. But yeah, that was another set of like the performative element of like watching it at home was another element. And I actually like listening from what Sam was talking about, I was thinking about like K-pop dance, you know, like how it takes shape in so many different cities. And like, yeah, these kids, they upload their own videos of dance choreography in a perfect, like, yeah, like they get to the point of like from beginning to the end, and they make their own music videos. And so I think this culture of like, you know, like bodies moving through simultaneous spaces is like very concurrent issue. And like, especially in the young generations, like, you know, the time is like really like immediate, like there's no delay in certain extent. So yeah, definitely an interesting way to explore if they allow.
Like all of TikTok.
Yeah,
That's like the
exactly.
entire platform of TikTok is like someone uploads some kind of video or like, I don't know, trend of something, and then other people.
잠깐 첨언을 하자면 약간 그런 거였어요. 그러니까 뭐 하나의 지시문이나 어떤 하나가 있고 그런 트래블링 없이 각각의 지역에서 협력하는 그런 곳에서, 그러니까 각 지역에서 다발성으로 발생할 수 있는 뭔가, 그러면 콜라보레이티브한 그런 것들이 되지 않을까.
오노요코 피스 같은 그런 거죠, 예를 들면. Like, Trevor, do you want to add something?
Could you repeat
Different
the
medium,
question?
like, other than moving image?
Collaborations other than moving image, yeah. So I definitely, you know, I do think that, for instance, you know, when we put these shows together, we're talking largely about contemporary art. We're talking largely about, in this case, video. I really liked Silke's notion of archival materials and so forth, perhaps because Pem has an extraordinary archive of materials that are super relevant to today and very illuminating and very kind of strange and surreal in relation to our present moment. And that's the kind of a thing that the status of the object is not so much as it is with painting and sculpture about the kind of discipline of holding attention and space, but more about a kind of a provision of an idea and in information. So therefore, it's more flexible. And you know, having someone from one context come into another context and begin to kind of dig into different archives and different materials. I mean, we already do that in many cases with artists. Another thing that I think is you know, there is so much, as has already been said, you know, music is something that has been, seems to be fairly readily translated and transmitted, except that so often, certainly during the pandemic, less so now, but you would tune into these events where there'd be like a really interesting band doing something, and but the quality of the stream was terrible. So I've done some work working on commissioned projects with musicians as opposed to necessarily artists who are riffing on the idea of music, and building in a kind of a proper production background. So, you know, you've got a proper audio production, proper video production, and you co-produce it and then release it. I do think that one of the kind of challenges, or one of the things that I think this project has made me think about is like how and where can that kind of absorptive attention happen, because that's kind of what interests me about the physical space, right? The idea that you can be in effect present, but of course you can also be very present and absorbed in a book or in a mobile phone. So, you know, maybe as kind of curators thinking further about, like, as producers, like, what are the kinds of conditions that might augment and intensify that kind of relationship? Because I think that kind of relationship is one which is potentially transformative for the viewer.
Yeah, I totally agree in a way that like trying to provoke the here and now was something that we wanted to address through streaming Suspense as well, in a way. Then how, like, if it was possible, if it was not the time-based media, like what shape would it take place? And I think that's an interesting question. Yeah, is there any other question from the floor?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that we're now talking about non-media art in the context of Watch and Chill, because if you think about media art, it reminds me, I think this is not just myself, but Walter Benjamin's appreciating artworks in the era of mechanical reproduction. Clearly, it's far easier to reproduce moving images, especially with the technology that we have nowadays. And I think that entails the question of, because it's therefore less scarce. For example, there's only one Mona Lisa.
Yeah.
But when it comes to media artworks, as long as you have one of these, if you have a digital device, you can, well, not maybe in the quote unquote ideal fashion which the artist wants you to appreciate their work, but still you can, you know, kind of at a quasi level maybe appreciate that work of media. And on the other hand, for the performing arts, for example, face to face, same physical space, you can actually physically smell the sweat and, you know, all the other sense that oozes out from the performer's body and your fellow audience members as well. You try to do that in a watch and chill fashion, all that is going to be gone. And I'm not saying that therefore this is something that we shouldn't even think about, but I think there's a fundamental aesthetic difference in terms of morphology and semantics. When you think about exercising a non-media form of art in a watch and chill fashion, and I think maybe in that sense we might want to consider, could this actually have the potential of degrading that natural value of performing arts or other, you know, styles of art which are not which are impossible to mechanically reproduce.
Yeah, I think like, I mean, this is an imagining session, so we can go on, kind of talk about like what shape it could take place in this kind of the possibility of reductions of the environmental experience or the aura of the work that one might say. And I think it's an interesting way that like Watch and Chill had dealt with, like, you know, how to kind of translate the actual collection to the specific commission that we made for some of the MMCA collection work. For instance, Song Sang-hee's work that you're showing in the exhibition now. So yesterday we just launched an ebook of the video, and initially it was a work that won the Korean Art Prize in 2017. And she really went through like 50 different cities to find the traces of forced deformations of bodies. And there's a lot of tragic sceneries and documents and archives that are all like flickering in her videos. But because she intentionally wanted the work to be like not so dogmatic or didactic, so she kind of omitted all the text that would insinuate specificity of each places. But then the work has been there for a while, and people wanted to see, like, people really wanted to understand like what these images are from. And so, and she, like, the artists are not then ready to actually release that information a little bit. One could say that this is a bit of degradation, but and I think like it took a time for the artists to kind of think about it in a different format. So like the ebook that we produced with Song Sang-hee included all the quotations and citations of like how she referred these each images that consisted to the video work, to each other video work. So yeah, that would be another possibility, like how this kind of aura of the work would be translated in a different format that would lesser degrade the like kind of tangibility of the work itself. Yeah, I mean, it's a really great question.
I like how we bring really Benjamin into the discussion, you know, because really the here and now, I think that's what has the most change with the digitalization of our societies, you know, and I think museums can really re-inject a sort of aura into through the presentation, and even online we can think harder, because I think museums have been very lazy and not been following the development of digital developments in our societies, you know, because most museums have used the digital for their communication on websites, and, you know, like, I mean, we use technology, but not in the most interesting way of thinking about these deeper questions. So I think that's why Watch and Chill, you know, was so meaningful to many of us, because it tried to exactly attack this laziness, you know, and let's try something. And I think it's only through these empirical approaches, you know, where we also fail and we succeed in certain things, that we can get to the next level. But now really it's about, the question that you asked, how to maintain that, how to grow it, you know, and how to find even more allies in developing something.
There are like institutions that I can name, but like they were really kind of felt bad that like this was the end of the watch and chill. So maybe, but yeah. Do you want to add something? No? Yeah. Okay, so the gentleman with the black shirt. Question.
So I'll say I will speak in English. Thanks for the wonderful discussion. So maybe this is just comment, maybe questions. Take it if you will. And so I thought about why the initial question was losing control, and losing control of what? And then you mentioned that decentralized curatorial practice. So perhaps this had to do with the urgency that driven by the COVID pandemic. So people are not coming, so you need the audience. You have a collection, so there's a big urgency. So so that, you know, around that kind of. So maybe comment or question would be that pandemic is almost over, so it has become endemic. There's no urgency now. So we've been hearing a lot about what will be the next version 4, but then without that urgency we had 3 years before. Yeah, just that's why I'm saying this is a comment. You know, what's going to happen? You know, unless we have another pandemic, then probably another urgency there. But so yeah.
Sure. I mean, I would say like, I think what's been interesting, even like for me as a curator in this discussion, is like hearing from colleagues who worked on the first edition, because I was doing projects in 2020 that were stalled, but I wasn't doing watch and chill. So like, I think the way in which you guys were thinking and being really creative and like structuring this program and what it's turned into is like a really amazing journey, and actually will probably be really interesting for people to look at in like 5 years and like reflect on like successful projects of the pandemic, because there was definitely a lot that I think were really not successful, and I mean, I think anyone trying anything is great, but especially when it came to video, like, I don't know, I was in New York for the first 6 months of lockdown, and I was in Mexico for, there was never really a second lockdown, but there, when there was like restrictions, and I remember it was amazing because you could see like, I mean, a lot of museums had video work online, a lot of magazines, like Art Review Asia actually had like incredible, I saw like Louise Roque, like 2 of his video works were there, was where I saw more of his stuff. And it's now someone I collaborate with frequently. But I think the questions of like, how do we, which you've brought up, how do institutions that have collections with video in it continue to show these collections beyond just necessarily having to have a video show? Because the medium does allow for some more malleability and slipperiness. So I think that hasn't gone away, even if the pandemic is over in terms of like lockdowns and restrictions and whatever else. And I think thinking about creative ways of showing a medium that actually offers so much also hasn't gone away. So I just think the way it started was a very specific condition that I think the original curators really brought up an amazing idea and a set of conditions. And I think it's great how it's, I mean, even the way the project, you said that this is by far the exhibition that is on view downstairs is definitely the biggest installed exhibition of the entire series. And then I'm happy that TONO had 6 video installations, but still not the same level as this, but it's gone from something that was entirely online pretty much, it sounds, to having Gallery 5 at the MMCA, which is amazing, and 7 other partners. So I think the main, sorry that I'm now like rambling, but I think the questions just that were originally brought up that still remain just haven't gone away. So even if the pandemic is, in intensive purposes, over in a sense, this is something that I think in the future museums should be thinking more about.
Yeah, and it's all about also resilience as well, that like, how do you, it's not to say you're always looking for trouble, but I mean, pandemic was special in the sense that, you know, we all experienced the same disease and the same fear and same panic that were like really overarching every museum. So like we had this very special moment and opportunity to really rethink about the role of a museum as a public space. And I think like the lesson learned from that, like trying to kind of find ways to be more resilient to, and the problem is still there. I mean, we have a war, and like I was in Venice like just last week, was it? That a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, that like we cannot fly over Russia, so we had to go around all the way to Central Asia, and it took forever to get one place to the other. And so, yeah, there's certainly limitations. There's global, like, warming and all that kind of issues that is constantly challenging us. And so, I don't know. I mean, I think there are elements that could be relevant. Yeah.
Maybe one thing I like very much about M+ is that our digital team is under curatorial. So all our digital projects, including new commissions that are purely online or co-commissioning, like we did with Sharjah or Hanefkens, sit all under curatorial, and they are discussed with the same seriousness than any other big exhibition. So I think for museums, one way forward is also to structurally acknowledging and giving more space to the digital, that it's not just becoming a cool one-off project or a side project, but something that we take very seriously and try to connect also with other art forms. Because I always think the problem with a lot of these digital projects is they sit in their own bubble and they're not connected to a Rembrandt or to a Walter Benjamin or whatever, and I think that needs to stop, and we can contribute to that, I think as institutional curators who have that kind of interest or hybrid.
And I think also, like you mentioned, like the sense of urgency, but actually when Sharjah got on board, like we were like transitioning out, we were really trying to transition out of the whole pandemic, and really, so I think like that our sense of urgency or our motivation to this project wasn't necessarily like pandemic driven. And I think that's kind of like the charm of this project. Like you can pull so many things out of it. Like it can be about collection, it can be about digital media, it can be about the pandemic, but it can also be about like international collaborations or building like different kinds of art history or like this. So there's like so many aspects kind of actually packed into this project that we actually, even for all the participating institutions, we may come from like different perspectives, and we take something, but we also take something else. And I think that's kind of like the charm of this project. And I also think that's why like we're having a lot of questions on like how it can go further, and it can be so many different things.
Also, like in terms of technology, like we're not using like mega high-tech technology neither. I mean, it's like just a website. A bit like IP address cognition, like are you human kind of like a process. There's a gatekeeper to avoid robots, so that like we identify each other, that are you human? And then when that process is approved, then like it's basically a Vimeo Premium. So like it's kind of like with the high security, with the highest paid one. And so it's really simple technology like that anybody actually can do. And so in the way that like it's really the intention and like how you want to form this the level of communication and structures that this would actually work and function. Trevor, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I do. So I can remember when we were in the lockdowns and in the pandemic, there was absolutely an urgency to being online all the time. And not only were we working online all the time, but we were entertaining ourselves online all the time. And I can remember this kind of feeling as soon as the kind of pandemic eased, that like, oh God, thank God I don't have to be on a screen anymore, right? And
ironically, he's on the screen.
Ironically, I'm on the screen again. But that's my point, right? That that I'm moving towards here. That actually, I think there was a real dip for a period as we all kind of readjusted again to being in public together, that we were satisfying our hunger for being together, for feeling sweat, smelling, and all the rest of it. But as we move forward, digital devices continue to be like such an important channel for so many things that we do, both in our work lives and in our leisure activities. So, you know, it continues to be a really, really important pipeline culturally. You're right, it doesn't have the same level of urgency. Perhaps it almost becomes invisible again, but it's invisibly everywhere. And to work with that kind of ubiquity, just on a more everyday casual basis, I think is itself an interesting condition for us to be thinking about.
Another thing that I think is just important to bring up and note is the existence of streaming platforms that do work with artists, not filmmakers, but artists. Some artists who are also filmmakers, but artists who just make video work. So like Mubi, which is like an international streaming platform, mostly for like amazing curated like cinema. They do work with video artists. They don't have like a specific horizontal for video art, but like Martine Sims has had a number of works on it. And they do it like with different like artist spotlights, but there's some that have been fully brought into the platform. And Criterion channels, I might be mixing this up. I know for Mubi for sure, Martine Sims is on Mubi. And I saw that Anna Vaz, who's Martine's an artist from the US, and she makes video art, but she actually made her first feature film, which was, I guess, bought to have distribution rights through Mubi internationally. And that was a collaboration. I guess her gallery, Sadie Coles, kind of placed it with Mubi. So that's like an interesting thing to think about, like the ways in which, obviously different, that's cinema streaming platform versus MMCA streaming platform, public institution versus, is Mubi American, British? I don't remember, I should know. Anyway, but like very much a for-profit company. And then also someone like Anna Vaz, who's a filmmaker that is on film festival circuits, but also shows video art and works between contemporary art and the cinema world. So instances of like, this is already, like this is not a pandemic thing. That's, I think, just an instance of this. This is like very much in existence also in the commercial sector as well. So I think thinking about ways also, I think has been brought up, the museums are not the most reactive always or the quickest to move with things. And a lot of these things have already been permeating and existing, and artists are already very much involved. The other one I was couldn't remember if Kevin Beasley, also another American artist, I think his works are on Criterion Channel, but maybe it's also just Mubi. So basically kind of these giants of like streaming cinema are very much including contemporary artists in an interesting way. But I think it's a conversation of like, what if they collaborated with the museum to include the museum collection? Like that's an alliance type of question that like, I'm sure there would be a lot of legal logistics and IP and whatever, but could be really amazing. So maybe you guys should talk to Mubi.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, like Silke, you used to run like DVD distribution for artists' video work, right? So,
I mean, I'm always annoyed when we put together a great program and I see, oh no, it's also available on Mubi. But it's true, they have done an amazing job in, providing a platform for this kind of cinema. But the films are often not always available. Like a lot of it feels sometimes to me also like an accumulation of many, many good names, but when you look for the actual content, you can't actually access it. So I think it's also, that's more also the logic of being a for-profit, like, enterprise where you try to get a network as dense as possible. But it's true, but I don't know how that relationship could actually be, what would be the benefit for a museum collection to be there.
yeah.
I mean, it's a new kind of audience, but it would then also probably stop there. I don't know. Yeah, it's an interesting idea.
I think it was like an artist spot, like because you're right. I mean, the way a movie also operates is you like, one time they've worked with anyone ever, they're like on their database. So it like looks like they have like every filmmaker ever, but it's a beautiful image and bio of the filmmaker, but as you say, it's a little misleading. But then they do have things like Anna Vaz, I think it's like a week or it's a specific time frame which is said, and it's like artist spotlight, and there's like 2 of her works there. So it's not like claiming to be her entire like canon of filmmaking. I mean, I can imagine, let's say the MMCA Mubi 1-week collaboration spotlight, curated selection, like maybe manifesting this to happen. And I guess for the MMCA, it offers wider distribution network. And for people, one, that maybe don't know about the museum or what the museum's collections holding have, and then it's a platform that's also incredibly easy to use and one just exists. So obviously you have a streaming platform, but there's a lot of museums that have video collections that they haven't built the website. As you said, it's a website, but still, you had to develop that, which was amazing.
And I think like the difference between those archival platforms that sometimes have streaming like events with the Watch and Chill is that we actually primarily like consider the streaming platform as an site of exhibition. So it's like, you know, from very beginning, like the intention was that it is a curatorial project from beginning to the end, and that is specifically to be placed in the physical space as well. So it's very different in a way, but then obviously there's the things that we can learn from it, like and how to archive it and all that kind of stuff. So we have like a time to get one more questions from the floor. I noticed there's a Professor Kim Ji-hoon here. Do you want to ask something?
Actually, I don't have a specific because I just jump in the discussion at 4:50. Just before you guys turn your microphone into the pro. But so I've also one thing I like to comment in the context of Korean the situation of how to deal with the curated moving image in the museum context and whatever is and its contribution of Watch and Chill and how it contributes to sustaining itself for the both future sustainability of showcasing moving images in both online and offline is I think the best way is to extend from the perspective of MMCA extend this initiative into the stable establishment of film and video department in the museum, so that
you already have a film and video.
yeah, because what I was wondering is this kind of initiative has been collaborated with the legacy or the inheritance of the development of film and video curatorship in the global exhibition or institutional context. So actually, I've been studying the history of exhibiting cinema in the moving image since the 1990s, because it is the very beginning of the global phenomena in which many museums turn their interest into so many moving image artists and artists and filmmakers and etc. Initiated by the Basel Image exhibition at Pompidou in the 1990s. So I've been examining the history of moving image, that exhibition in terms of how the different museums have been dealing with the idea of moving images in different contexts and in relation to the questions and issues of contemporary art since then. And so the kind of very intense, interesting, but not always, complicit, relationship between cinema and the museum that Thomas Ellis, film scholar Thomas Ellis has a famous called two dispositives that have long owned its history, that so that there have been not only collaboration but also conflict actually between them. So so in that context, I think that the great contribution for negotiating the two apparatuses lies in the work of specialized curators dedicated to accommodating cinema, video art, and other kinds of moving image in the museum context in dialogue with the changing context of cinema. I'm thinking of Chris Ives, Christine Banacci, and Stu Skomer, and so other names that are known as film and video, specialized curators. But there is no such a kind of concept in the South Korean contemporary art, although MMCA has made a great contribution to to showcasing a variety of moving image exhibitions and screenings, including Watch and Chill. So the future sustainability of this project is whether this kind of initiative is extended into the more stabilized, settlement of the idea of film and video curating.
I think you raised really interesting question about like the curatorial specialty and like structurally our museum is kind of working in a department of like spaces. So like we have a department of MMCA Seoul, MMCA Gwacheon, and so it's not like in MM Plus where you have like a department of moving image, a department of other genre of art. So it's different way of operating. But yeah, I think like there's definitely something very important that we learn from Watch and Chill, like the power of the fluidity of moving image and how it could play. And one might not say that like what curators at the MMCA like work on one specific medium for all, but it's also kind of contemporary that like the curators work with the various medium and we have like a already kind of existing film and video program, and maybe there's a way that we can kind of work around with it. I mean, I think developing like specialty and kind of put that into a context of Watch and Chill might be an interesting way forward. I think so too.
I'm an art historian actually, and not really a film. I never studied film, so it's also interesting how at M+ a lot of the curators who have a specialization came there by pure interest and just practicing, certain types of curation. So I think even if the structure is not set up in the way like we have it at M+, there are many possibilities because it is really around ideas and mediums. So.
I think one kind of interesting fact here is actually at Sharjah Foundation, we have a film team that is like a very traditional like cinema team. We have a film festival, independent cinema, experimental filmmaking, which sometimes overlap with our exhibition programs, but also has its own tradition and history of categorizing and understanding things. But when we had Watch and Chill, the film team actually worked on this project. And I think even though like they're very used to our moving image exhibitions, them actually working on this type of show that is actually quite different from the film festivals that we put on, it was also like a pretty good, I think it was a very nice experience. And it actually ended up us kind of questioning from like the other perspective, maybe in our film festivals, maybe it's time that we do more of this in a way. Like maybe so it was kind of like an opportunity for us to really figure out maybe this is like a format. I mean, there are like Berlinale, Expanded Forum and those kind of places, but it was an important experience for us in that perspective.
Okay, so I think our time is up. Okay, so like last question. From the head of department of research and publication at MMCA.
그동안 말씀해 주신 발표 너무 흥미로웠고요. 어쩌면 이건 질문이 아닐 수 있을 것 같고, 김주인 교수님의 말씀을 듣다가 이 프로젝트의 3년 동안의 과정을 지켜본 큐레이터의 한 사람으로서 제 의견을 좀 덧붙일 수 있지 않을까라는 생각이 들어서 의견을 드리는데, 지금 이제 김주인 교수님 같은 경우에는 필름 앤 비디오를 미술관에서 소개하는 것들, 그리고 무빙 이미지를 조금 더 기존의 다른 매체들처럼 더 적극적으로 미술관이 소개해야 되는 거 아닌가에 대한 이제 의견을 주셨지만, 그 부분에 대해서 저도 동의를 하지만 저는 이 워치앤칠의 프로젝트가 가지는 의미는 좀 다른 데에 있다라고 큐레이터로서 생각하는 편이에요. 그래서 이제 아까 이제 발표하면서 피바디 액세스에서도 말씀을 하신 것처럼 저희가 코로나라는 특수한 팬데믹이라는 특수한 상황이 있기는 했지만 물리적인 공간을 가진 미술관들이 연대를 할 수 있는 새로운 형식 내지는 뭔가 저희에게 그 시대적 당위성에 의한 필요였겠죠. 그래서 미술관과 어떤 미술인들이 하나의 매개를 가지고 연대를 했다는 부분에서 저는 이제 굉장히 이 프로젝트를 인상 깊게 봤고, 근데 거기에서 더 의미가 있는 건 그 연대가 강제되지 않은 느슨한 방식이어서, 그래서 오늘 주제가 이제 탈중앙화인 거잖아요. 그 각자의 방식으로 각자의 어떤 큐레이션을 할 수 있지만 동시에 우리가 같은 목적을 가지고 미술을 지향하는 사람으로서 다 연결되어 있다라는 거를 굉장히 순발력 있게 끌어냈다는 점에서 저는 이 프로젝트에 굉장히 이제 흥미로웠고, 동시에 거기에서 이제 한 가지 더 나가는 거는 아까 말씀하신 것처럼 관람객을 공유할 수 있었다는 거. 각자 어쩌면 그러니까 관객과의 연대 방식에서 저희가 새로운 소통의 방식을 찾았다는 점에서 저는 또 이 프로젝트를 굉장히 인상 깊게 생각하고 있습니다. 그래서 아마 이제 워치앤칠은 뭐 이제 엔데믹 이후에 다른 방식으로 갈 수는 있겠지만 저희한테 각자의 미술관들이 가지고 있는 고유의 목소리로서의 어떤 기획의 강화라는 책무를 주고, 그러나 화이트 큐브를 넘어서는 방식으로서 우리가 어떤 전 세계적인 자원을 공유하는 새로운 시도에 대한 문제 제기를 주지 않았을까. 그리고 그런 점에서 이제 여기 계신 모든 미술관, 그리고 이 프로젝트를 굉장히 성공적으로 성사시킨 이지하 개사가 반드시 다음 포맷으로 우리를 데리고 갈 수 있을 거라는 생각을 해봅니다.
갑자기 숙제가 생겨버렸는데 like I have a huge homework now. But yeah, I think that was like a really great and gracious remark to finish up today's session. And thank you everybody. 너무너무 늦은 시간까지 4시간에 장장 걸쳐서 이 자리에 함께 해주신 여러분 너무 감사드리고 9개 국가에서 이렇게 다 한 자리에 모여주신 워치앤칠 시즌 1, 2, 3 콜라보레이팅 한 큐레이터 분들 너무 감사드립니다. 네, 감사합니다. 이것을 마치겠습니다.